Welcome to USC Rossier's Leadership Month and today's webinar, Distance Learning. Is this the new normal? Before we begin, I would like to review the process for submitting a question for our panelists. Please type your question in the Q&A box that can be accessed by clicking on the Q&A action located at the bottom of your screen. We have reserved time towards the end of the webinar for your questions and hope to get to as many as possible. We also received several questions via the registration form and have tried to incorporate as many of them as possible into our structured Q&A at the beginning of the session. If you are planning to share our experience at today's session on social media, we encourage you to include the Leadership Month hashtag #RossierLeads, which appears at the top of the screen. Lastly, please note a recording of this webinar will be available in the next few days. A link will be sent via email. And now, I would like to introduce our moderator. Dr. Scott Smith is the Associate Professor of Education at Rossier and Associate Director of Student Publications at USC. He earned his doctorate in education psychology at USC, where he also earned a Master of Education and bachelor's degree in cinematic arts. At this point, I will turn the program over to you, Dr. Smith.
Hello there, welcome everyone. I'm so glad that you could join us for today's discussion. We're going to be talking about distance learning and whether this is the new normal. We've all been through so much in the last few months. It feels like it's been years. And we have gathered a panel of experts to hear their perspectives on online learning and what it represents in this new era that we've been thrust into. And what we can expect and some ideas about how to smooth the transition from our sort of previous normal into what is coming up ahead. So let me introduce our panel of guests. First, I have Dr. Victoria Bhavsar, the Director for the Center for the Advancement of Faculty Excellence at Cal Poly Pomona. Welcome. We also have Dr. Patricia Dickenson, an Associate Professor from National University. And we're also joined by Dr. Yulonn Harris, a bilingual virtual supervising teacher at Compass Charter Schools in Thousand Oaks. So welcome to all of you. Thank you so much for joining us. So let's begin by just going around with the three of you and tell us a little bit about your career history and your background as it relates to distance learning. So let's go ahead and begin with you, if you would, Dr. Bhavsar.
Hi, so I actually, my doctoral work, my undergraduate and doctoral work was actually in agricultural science. I'm a soil scientist by education. So I would say that I didn't exactly fall into faculty development. I graduated into faculty development. And I'm really glad that I have an agricultural background. Agriculture has a long tradition and history of education with the Cooperative Extension Service, and that's part of my background as well that I'm very happy about. But during my PhD and postdoctoral years, I really loved teaching, and that's really what I wanted to do. I discovered that bench research was not for me. And so I pivoted to teaching and then was able to find my way into faculty development. And that's been my pathway for about 20 years now. And I say that I have the best job on campus. Like I do have the best job on campus because I get to work with the best and most amazingly creative faculty who want to do the right things by their students. And I'm also very lucky at Cal Poly Pomona to have an outstanding team of instructional designers, multimedia developers, and faculty associates who work with me. So that's where I'm from and have a great job.
Well, thank you very much. That's terrific. Dr. Dickenson?
Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Dickenson. I received my bachelor's degree in English and psychology from the University of Massachusetts in Amherst. And after graduating, I moved to California from Massachusetts, and I actually started working in high technology right around the dot-com boom in 1998. And I spent several years working as both a technical writer and an assistant editor for CNET, which stands for Computer News and Technology. And then I got a great job in Culver City, California. And I was a technical writer making a ton of money, but hated my job. So I started volunteering for a program called The Wonder of Reading. And I started working in the schools and loved working with the kids and was just teaching them how to read, and decided I went to a tech conference one year, and I just remember the one person that I connected with, and she was an educator. And she encouraged me to pursue a career in teaching. So in 2000, I took the plunge and I became a teacher. I did not have a teaching credential, so I was on an emergency credential as an intern. And I started working in South Los Angeles, right down the street from USC. In fact, we took lots of field trips there, and I taught at Menlo Avenue Elementary School. I taught there for about 8 years. I was an elementary teacher, taught first and fifth grade, and ended up falling in love with teaching math. I got really involved with the UCLA Math Project and just loved this new approach to teaching math that was hands-on, conceptually based, engaging, and became a math coach for the Los Angeles Unified School District. And just around that time, I started the doctoral program at USC. I got my credential at Cal State, which was in a cohort program at a trailer on 95th Street. It was such a great experience. And then when I graduated from USC in 2009, that is right about the time that they launched their MAT program, their Master's in Teaching, which is an online program. And I became one of their first adjunct instructors. And I taught there for several years until I moved into National University. I took a position as an assistant professor, a full-time position. And I've been at National University since 2012. I'm now an associate professor. I've written about 10 credential courses for both their bachelor's and their graduate level programs, specializing in elementary math as well as science, designing instruction, and it's just been a wonderful experience. So I'm glad to be here and talk about distance learning.
We're happy to have you. Thank you so much for joining us. And then Dr. Harris, tell us a little bit about your background.
Okay, hi everyone, I'm Dr. Yulonn Harris. And so I too got my doctorate degree from USC. Educational leadership was primarily my focus, and my specialty was teaching educators in multicultural societies, so TIMS, which was our minor specialty. But I specialize in teaching English language learners. My whole dissertation and research was surrounding strategies and approaches, or instructional strategies and approaches for teaching English language learners. And my background is mostly teaching secondary students at a secondary level, high school, for the first maybe 14 years of my teaching career. And then I moved into teaching virtually right as I completed my doctorate in 2015. So I've been working in the virtual arena with K-12 education for probably going on 5 years now. And I wear two big hats, actually, as a virtual supervising teacher with Compass Charter. And then also I work with the Major League Baseball team, the Colorado Rockies. I'm a virtual curriculum specialist with them, and I teach the players, the Spanish-speaking players, English throughout the season, and also kind of oversee the teachers and work with the teachers virtually. We piloted one of the programs I created a couple years ago. It took off, it's doing really well. So I really do love the virtual education arena, and I'm just looking forward to just revolutionize, bringing together the traditional and the online environment together to make it more conducive for everyone.
Sounds terrific. Well, thank you very much. We're so glad to have you. You know, it's so nice to have all three of you here with your breadth of experience and the breadth of what you're doing right now as well. So I wanted to begin by asking you about what normal is for you, because this session is about the new normal. So I wonder if you might take just a moment to talk about normal in your perspective, you know, where you are right now in your work, both what it used to be in January and February, what it is right now, and what you think it will look like, you know, this fall. So Dr. Bhavsar, are you comfortable beginning with that there?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So in January and February, I think maybe I wasn't paying attention to the news, but of course I had no inkling that this was coming. And so we were just planning on a normal semester of, you know, in-person workshops and conferences and things. And we had a big conference planned for March the 6th, which we were able to get in just under the wire, and then everything went away. So it was busy, and I was running all over campus physically. And then everything changed, obviously, in the blink of an eye. And my current normal is being on Zoom a great deal, as I'm sure that most people are, and also doing a lot of small group coaching with faculty, which is not something that I had ever done much of before. So one of the things that I do now is that I hold faculty Zooms a couple times a week, and anybody's welcome to come. I usually get 10 to 12, maybe way back in the beginning in March, I was getting 40 or 50 people to those. It certainly has dropped off over the summer, but we'll just talk about anything that the faculty want to talk about. And that could be advice on using our technology on campus. It could be, what is the campus policy about XYZ at this point? And I tell them what I think it is, and then I tell them, let me check with the associate provost and give you a real answer on that. I would anticipate that continuing. And I also do a lot of correspondence by email. I would say that something that became normal really fast, again, back in March, I don't know how I got the notion that I was the person that was supposed to send out a daily email with announcements and news and things, but I formed that habit, and I sent out a daily email with a thought or a resource or an idea or something. And I think I never did a survey to see how many faculty actually appreciated that versus how many wished I would sit down and shut up. But I did get a lot of people saying that, wow, we really appreciate those emails. They're a touchstone. They're always practical. They're always something that we look forward to. In the summer, I've backed off to twice a week, and in the fall, I'll probably go back to once a week. But so that's all to kind of say that my normal is now going to be a much more systematic, consistent, scheduled outreach to faculty than I have ever felt constrained to do before.
Yeah, I think that's definitely something where, you know, we're all sort of living, you know, on Zoom now between meetings, and I think that that kind of touch point, as you're saying, with the regular newsletter is really valuable. So I'm glad you were able. I'm sure that, you know, it's an extra burden for you having stepped forward, but I'm glad that you were able to take the reins and start that. So
it was fun to think of them. And somehow I had this great plan that I would set up all of my emails for the week on Monday. And I quickly found that no, things change like that. And I needed to be sending, my email on Wednesday had to be informed by what happened on Tuesday evening. So, oh well, there was always something to say.
Yeah, that is definitely true. Dr. Dickenson, what do things look like for you? How has your world been, and how has your university been faring?
Okay, so I've been teaching online since 2009. So it hasn't been a big shift in terms of what I've already been doing. In fact, it's been kind of exciting for me to have other colleagues and people, friends, teachers, and reach out to me and connect with on a Zoom meeting, and and just find innovative ways to bring some of the things that I've been doing for so long to support people in my space of education. I think for me, the biggest challenge has been managing the three little munchkins that are running around my house now, and teaching them how to be self-directed and how to manage their day, and guiding them because they are young. My daughter's in first grade. My second son, he is in fifth grade, and he does have an IEP, so he does need additional services. And then I have a middle schooler who is insanely hyperactive. So that's been my biggest challenge is, now having to share my work at home space with my three children and making sure that they're continuing to learn and develop and to grow. So that's been a challenge for me. And yeah, it's been definitely a learning space for me to grow as well.
Yeah, I definitely, hear and feel what you're saying. I have a very similar situation with two little ones, a rising second grader and a rising kindergartner, that it's, I too had been teaching, online before the shift, but, that, new structure at home presents a lot of new challenges. And, I can see it with students as well. And we'll talk a little bit more in depth about that here in a minute. But Dr. Harris, what is the lay of the land in your world?
So I'm similar to Dr. Dickenson. Yeah, I have been in the virtual world. This has really been a great experience because now I'm getting the opportunity to have more conversation with the traditional teachers and parents. A lot more parents are reaching out to me from church, from the community, because they know that I'm a virtual instructor. And so having more collaboration and a lot of Zoom meetings and impromptu Google Meets just to kind of guide and direct parents and other teachers in the traditional brick and mortar on how to use the resources and what's accessible and how to make them accessible for students. So that's been, I think, not really a challenge, but kind of a blessing to just be able to share and have knowledge. And also, I think one of the greatest challenges for me is staying abreast of all the best practices for virtual education and online learning, because it seems that it's going up and changing like sporadically now because of the COVID and the at home having to learn, and teaching parents how to teach their students and keep them on routine, especially with K-12 or the little ones at least. Just being able to give them the knowledge and wisdom on how to access different resources for keeping their kids on pace. Because again, this is the new normal for everyone now, and parents are now having to be equipped to actually teach and not just oversee. They have to supervise their actual learning now. So yeah, being abreast with those tools really help.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and it sounds like all of us, having had some experience with online, have become sort of a resource, for other people that they look to say, what is your best advice? So, what do you tell faculty members? What is the best way that they could, that they can adjust to distance learning when you're sort of thrown into this from outside of that world?
Is that directed to me, Dr. Smith?
For anyone. For any of you.
I have suggested making sure to create virtual spaces that include social apps that lend themselves to education. So, make sure you're knowledgeable with, some of the Perusal is a reading app, TikTok and the funny things that kids use, just making sure that we include educational aspects of it. On Perusal, you can have students read text and they can share in that text and they can use emojis and they can, you can monitor it as well. But just using the social apps that they use and using them from an educational standpoint, I think has been a great aspect for the distance learning as far as K-12. Higher ed, I'll leave that up to Dr. Bhavsar.
What do you think about that, Dr. Bhavsar? What types of advice have you given to faculty that are trying to make this transition from on ground to online? What's the first thing you might tell them?
Well, if I could have told them anything a little, if I could have gone back in time a little bit, I would have said, please learn to use the basic tools that we have at the university. So for people who had always resisted the learning management system, which is Blackboard at Cal Poly Pomona, and they had a much harder lift than people who had been active with my group for some time. So if anybody, okay, so the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. The next best time is now. So the best time to learn Blackboard was 5 years ago. The next best time is now. So engage, like immediately, please start taking advantage of everything that your school or university offers. But don't feel like you have to do everything all at once. So we are perfectionists in my team, but we're experts, so we get to be perfectionists in this area. We on our side need to be really careful not to impose those expectations on our faculty, and instead to be celebrating when somebody who never used Blackboard can now post things on Blackboard. So we need to celebrate their achievements. A comment about the number of things that are out there and the resources that are out there. There's so much technology. It is really tempting to spend a lot of time trying to find the best thing out of the 50 options for all doing the same thing. And I would say, please rely on the experts at your institution because it's their job to comb through all of those and decide what's good. There's two things. One is that at Cal Poly Pomona, at least, we have to very carefully vet technologies for accessibility with learners with disabilities and also security. And so we've done that for the technologies that we offer. And the second thing is, you want to be careful because a new technology might have a slight improvement over the other app that you were using. But if it's just a little improvement, is that really worth learning a new platform and everything? Or does it add significant enough value for you to say, yeah, I'm going to switch and invest in learning it? So you want real good value before you invest a bunch of time in something.
Yeah, and that's terrific advice. I think there's always this sort of flow of new options that we see coming up, and especially if you're new to this and you've been thrown into it, it can be especially hard to sift through that, and a lot of faculty can get distracted right away, and that's a hard way to start. So yeah, that's terrific advice. Dr. Dickenson, what would be your first advice for faculty thrown into this new world?
Sure. Do you want me to comment in terms of faculty in the K-12 space or higher ed?
Both, that's fine.
I'd say for our higher ed, for K-12 teachers out there, it's really important to be all on the same page with whatever digital tools you're using. So as a parent, it's extremely overwhelming and confusing if you're in middle school and every teacher is using a different learning management system or a different digital tool. So you definitely want to start small and work collaboratively, get on the same page with your colleagues at your school site, decide what your digital plan is going to be. And then in terms of actually training the kiddos, you want to start your school year off with icebreakers to build those relationships and establish those norms for online learning, and also to promote digital literacy. So for example, you might have a tool that you want them to use, like Google Slides, and your intent might be for them to actually solve problems or write stories or narratives on that slides, but you should start off with something really personal and connected. Maybe it's a slide deck, having them do, you know, a slide about themselves and what they did over the summer, and then expanding that into specific content areas. So I'm a big fan of the TPAC model, and that comes from Misher and Kosher. So they have an integration model of how to infuse technological pedagogical content knowledge. And that's a great strategy. Also, universal design for learning with multiple means of action and expression and representation and engagement. So you want to make sure that you're making it fun and engaging. So you might start your, you know, live meet off with a Kahoot and having the kids play online, and then going into your content specific areas and what you want them to achieve each week. So setting them goals and having them break apart it into digestible chunks. And then throughout the week, you can schedule small group meetings with your students so they get that personalized learning from you, no more than 5 to 6 students, and just creating a space, whether using Google Classroom or a learning management tool like Schoolology or Canvas, so that they can ask questions and engage with their peers. For faculty, again, starting really small, going with one tool and using that tool until you've got it down and have automaticity. So your tool might be, again, using something like Google Slides. And I intently integrate tools into my courses with teacher candidates. I work with pre-service teachers. So I'll start the week off with a KWL chart and asking them what they know or want to know about a specific topic we're examining, like the next generation science standards. And then by week 3, they're actually creating a slide deck with colleagues, and they're, you know, applying the content knowledge. So again, starting with that space of making it really like a low floor and a high ceiling approach. So a low floor where it's okay to make mistakes, right? Because part of the reason why people do not embrace technology is because they have a fear of failure. And let me tell you, I've been in this space for quite some time. Failure will happen. In fact, the last conference I attended, I could not get on internet. So I had to hotspot my phone, get onto my personal computer, and then I just shared the link, and all of the teachers at my presentations were working in pods with other people that they've never met before. So just really be comfortable with failure and have a backup plan. So if something doesn't work, what can you do? And that's been a really good model for me in terms of my learning curve with using technology and also supporting teachers that are moving into this space.
Oh, that's terrific advice. For all three of you, is there anything else, you know, beyond sort of practicing, you know, over and over and having backups that you could advise teachers that have a lot of anxiety around this and how to reduce their anxiety going into it?
Yeah, I would definitely say be knowledgeable. Google Level 1 education certification is really good to start with. It gives you a basic fundamental aspect on the different types of platforms. Google Classroom period is a good platform to start with. It's also something kid friendly, I would say. Be able to create resources for collaborative learning. So one of the things I like to do is using Google Forms, especially because you can tweak those things later. You can drop in images, you can drop in videos, and they can be personalized for the learner's context. So you don't have to go back and revamp the whole and reinvent the wheel, so to speak, but you can just drop in, you know, even the students' pictures, the current students you have. And I use that a lot, even with my baseball players. So I think just making sure we also use universal outputs. There's one called IRAD. which is a step-by-step tutorial that captures your on-screen learning as you do it. And so that's been really great. You can put it in any kind of language right there. So, you know, just universal outputs and having more collaborative resources that allow students to jump in and tweak it later. And it's not a big, oh my gosh, this isn't working. You can tweak it within seconds. So I think that's really been a good key for virtual or online learning.
That flexibility, yeah, definitely. Do you, Dr. Bhavsar and Dr. Dickenson, do you have any thoughts on reducing anxiety?
Yeah, I would just say get over yourself. I mean, this is the new norm. It's what's happening. I know for myself personally, it was really hard for me to see myself and listen to myself. So I kept saying negative things like, oh my God, I sound so stupid. I keep saying like, well, I can't conjugate a thought. And so I had to just kind of get over myself and continue to practice and know that I was going to make mistakes. So for myself personally, I just started embracing it. And I was like, okay, this is my new reality. I have to get gritty and be okay with not being perfect. And I think it's really hard for us to as teachers, because we want to, we want to be the expert. We want to be the sage on the stage. And there's so much out there. So I would encourage you, if you're new to this space, to download Screencastify. It's a free app. You can put it right in your Chrome extension browser and start recording yourself. Start doing mini lessons. You don't need to go and get a tablet where you can write on a tablet. There's a lot of different tools that you can use. Even Zoom has a whiteboard. There's Classroom Screener, and there's a ton of tools out there. And just start recording yourself and start making playlists. If you need inspiration, a good friend of mine, if you're a K-5 teacher, is Ben Cogswell. He has over 850 lessons, 850,000 lessons, excuse me, on Seesaw, all for his kindergarten students that he made and curated. So I would just encourage you to find your inner child and, step outside the box, get silly, create your own Bitmoji, create a virtual classroom, try to have fun with it, get comfortable with YouTube. There's tons of teachers out there that are video logging their experiences on being a virtual teacher. So, start educating yourself in that space and, start videotaping yourself, and then send your videos to other colleagues, at practice teaching a Zoom meeting, which I do with my kids. I have my kids go on a separate computer and they're my students, and that's how I practice. So just get comfortable with it and embrace it.
That sounds terrific. Dr. Bhavsar?
Let's see. I have a lot of thoughts swirling around in my head, so maybe I'll just sort of start one. I'm seeing in the Q&A, somebody has just asked, how can we help our high school age kids stay engaged with their virtual classes, especially those with ADHD? And I'm going to say that I don't have expertise in either high school or ADHD, so this is a slightly tangential thought. But one of the things that I am doing in my own class this fall is having my students get away from the computer whenever possible. And I'm maybe a little bit lucky in that I teach soil science. And so it's like, go outside, dig a hole and see what happens. But I can get them away, and I'm making that an explicit expectation. And I wonder if that might help with engagement in other ways as well. But I think the original question was, how do you get over the anxiety and fear of doing this? And I really appreciate, Patricia, just get over yourself, it's okay. For faculty in higher education, that's a tough one, man, because, we love to be experts in everything. And yeah, so I think that you have to remember that we all entered academia because we wanted to learn. And this is the ultimate learning opportunity. And you need to readopt your growth mindset and say that all right, you know, like for me, maybe I was getting kind of bored teaching soil science for the 15th time. Well, I'm not bored. You know, this semester, it's a whole new challenge. I also want to tell a little story, and forgive me for going on a little bit. Nara reminded me of this. One of the challenges that we face in higher ed, and I'm sure you do in K through 12 as well, is we have a lot of hands-on classes, especially at Cal Poly Pomona. We really pride ourselves on our hands-on learning, and not being able to get into the labs. Like I just said, get away from the computer. So where do you go? Thank you very much, Victoria, for that. Well, the labs. And I was working with one faculty member who teaches a lab that they use sewing machines. It's an apparel construction class. And they use these like 10 or 15 different kinds of very fancy industrial sewing machines. And they can't go in. And she's like, what do I do? And so we talked through it. And she decided, she came up with the idea, she was just talking to me, that she would have them sew doll clothes, and they would practice the different kinds of stitches by hand. So the point is not the machines, the point is the stitches. And what an amazing opportunity to go back and learn a truly fundamental skill of apparel, which is hand sewing. And so she rejiggered, she rethought her learning outcomes to be a little bit more aligned with the situation in which she finds herself. So I think that's a good thing. But the other aspect of this, and this helps with anxiety too, is if you can find somebody who will listen to you work your ideas out. And you know, there's only one of me on my campus, and so you really need to find colleagues that can be like mastermind groups to help each other with that.
Yeah, I think it's vital that you know, we don't forget about those networks of support that are still there, that sometimes need to be reformed a bit because we're not seeing people in the hallways or that kind of thing. But you know, I think some faculty feel like they're on an island, and we have to constantly remind ourselves that, you know, not only do we have colleagues that we can lean on, but we have colleagues and people that, you know, maybe, you know, just a quick, you know, call away, that are at places, you know, like our alma mater or somewhere where, you know, someone has experience that we don't necessarily have. So, and thank you for sharing that story too. I think, you know, this is really, you know, one of those great opportunities to sort of re-examine what we've been doing all along. It's one of those disruptions that, you know, if we take it from the right perspective, we can, you know, turn things around and have a much higher quality, you know, coming out of this than when we went in. Which brings me to another topic that I wanted to discuss, which is the idea that distance learning has often had this perception about it from a lot of folks that it's of a lower quality than on-ground instruction, that it's somehow the sort of second choice. And now that we're in here, you know, I'm hearing lots of rumbling about, you know, people not wanting to, you know, pay tuition, for example, in higher ed for this kind of experience, or concerns in elementary that they can't have the same level of quality that they would have had in person. What are some things that instructors in online instruction, or instructional designers as well, what are some things that they could do to combat those perceptions of quality, both the perceptions and to truly boost the quality of the experience? Yeah, and for anyone that would like to sort of take that on there.
I'll start this one, but briefly. I think the first thing that you need to do is make sure that your online teaching and learning is as good as it possibly can be. So perception is not entirely divorced from reality. And then I think paying attention to the very fundamental things of engagement and alignment is really important. If students are engaged, it's almost impossible not to learn. They might not learn exactly what you thought or wanted, but they're going to learn something. I'll leave it at that one.
Dr. Harris, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think, can you repeat the question just really briefly?
Sure. So in terms of perceptions of quality and things like that, what could instructors or instructional designers do in your mind to help to improve the perception of quality and the actual quality of online instruction as compared to sort of traditional on-ground instruction?
Yeah, so planning ahead and being flexible, I found that to be most key. So for example, flipped instruction is something I use very often because all of the students, are not going to be on the same learning level or pacing. So, adding in things like flipped instruction to bring background knowledge, and you can increase the rigor even in that from level to level when it relates to the students' engagement. And you can add in fun things as well with the flipped instruction. I think I don't think it changes so much from the traditional classroom to virtual. I think we actually have more resources available to us to give to our students to allow them to not only master the content at their own pace, but I think it's more memorable, and they actually learn because they're comfortable in their own setting. They're not distracted. They don't have the undisciplined student. I know you guys don't have that. The undisciplined student running around his head, so I think they are a little more focused, and we can give a lot more resources where they can use it right on their phone. They can use it right on their tablet. So I think the rigor can really be more defined and personalized with online, in my opinion, from what I've seen versus the traditional. In the traditional classroom, I'd have 40 plus students in a classroom, and they were very energetic students that, challenge you at every level. So I could never reach all 40 of them at 100%. Versus the online virtual, I've been able to connect in a way to keep them engaged on their own level, which is really a great feeling when you connect with your students. And that's what I think drives virtual education so well. So, and I can increase the rigor at any stage.
Yeah, I think that's terrific.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Dr. Dickenson.
I just want to piggyback on what Yulonn was saying. It's really a great opportunity to kind of step outside the box of what traditional education looks like. Somebody was talking about ADHD earlier and how you can support, and my son actually has ADHD. I would have never known. He is so amazing at power tools. Had I not stepped outside the box when I'm trying to teach him math and realizing he just doesn't memorize multiplication facts. But when it came to actually, we built planner boxes and we built a storage box, and he was out measuring and applying and using rulers and really hands-on, and then creating these planner boxes that we have in our garden, which are so gorgeous, and talk about his confidence and his self-esteem just going through the roof, because he's hated math for so long because his brother is so good at it and his mom teaches it. But so I think it's a really great opportunity for teachers to think about how they can step outside the box. And there's certainly lots of amazing things that teachers are doing. I teach a course through the Heritage Institute. It's called Grit in the Classroom. And one of the things the teachers have to do is they have to create a genius hour and a passion project. And teachers are just learning about these new pedagogical approaches where the students have choice and voice, and they can take something that they're really passionate about and become an expert and teach their peers. And so teachers are doing that, they're applying it, and the kids have more time to really become masters of their learning. So I would encourage you guys to kind of, all those things that we as teachers typically do at the end of the school year, the projects, the things that quite honestly are the things that your kids remember when they're adults, right? I mean, as adult learners, we don't necessarily always remember doing the time drills and the tests because they cause a lot of anxiety, but we do remember those projects. We do remember the time when, you had to measure the flagpole or find the slope of an object and used real life things. So encouraging you to kind of step outside that box. And then really in terms of perceptions, that goes back to assessment. So when you are designing these online learning experiences, you want to make sure that your content and your learning objectives match up with the assessment. And so using different assessment tools, I have a list on my website, Teacher Prep Tech, and there's a whole list of assessment tools that are all free that will allow you to kind of get in that formative and summative assessment so that students are seeing their own growth, right? So you could use a tool like Edpuzzle, and they could watch a TED Talk, and while they're watching their TED Talk, you can embed questions. Or another tool I just found is called Insert Learning, which I love. And so let's say you're a high school teacher and you're teaching statistics and probability, and you love the Pew Research Center, which I do, it's phenomenal, and you want your students to really analyze the data there. You can insert a question. It basically takes a picture of the HTML page and allows you to insert questions. So you're getting assessment measures. And most certainly you want to include self-assessments, because this is where perceptions change. It's through self-assessment. So whether you're in higher education, in my courses, I start with, getting them to talk about their perceptions and their beliefs about themselves as a student of mathematics. And a lot of times those conversations are filled with anxiety and fear and bad experiences. I'm like, well, you're going to be a math teacher, you're going to be teaching, so how can we change those perceptions? And giving them the confidence to do that. So we do a flipped video in the class and a lot of different like UDL practices where they're showing what they know in multiple ways and representations. So building that into your practice, using different assessment measures, making sure that you're doing self-assessment, and that could be a weekly Google form, and you don't have to you could just make copies and reuse the same Google form and have your students do a self-assessment about what they learned each week. And then they start saying, wow, I am changing my beliefs. I am really learning and mastering this content. So it's really about pedagogy and assessment and your practices.
Sounds good. Well, as long as I have all of you here, with different sort of, expertise in different levels of, instruction, I wanted to also talk about the nature of online instruction that, in the past, online has largely been designed around an expectation of an older learner, of a higher education or adult education kind of learner. And now we are shifting all of it very quickly. We'd obviously been moving that direction toward younger and younger learners, but now we're pushing it into elementary, for example, where it has been just very barely experienced before. So I wonder if any of you have any advice or thoughts on elements about what traditional online instruction of older learners needs to be adjusted or modified for a younger audience.
Sure, I'll get started. So there's definitely a lot of digital tools out there, and as a teacher myself, when I started teaching in 1999, we were using Waterford, which is a reading program, and my kids loved it. And part of the reasons why it got discontinued is because not every teacher embraced using this tool to support their learners. And obviously now it's online learning, blended learning tools are being used ubiquitously across subject areas, from Khan Academy with math, and they're actually extending into other subject areas, to CK12, which has a strong focus on science, to Raz Kids, which is an online reading program, which is also phenomenal. One of the cool features of Raz Kids is kids not only listen to stories, but they record themselves reading a story, so then the teachers have an assessment of their learners. So there's so much out there. I think as teachers, you need to obviously think about what is the best tool for your learners and the students that you serve. And certainly there's a lot of research out there. IXL has traditionally been used with second language learners and has, I think LA Unified actually adopted IXL. And then the Mind Research Center just came out with a wonderful math tool. There's definitely a lot out there to choose from. And I say that because as teachers, I encourage you to kind of be the student and go through the tools and say to yourself, would this help my student learn? And I'll just say my own personal experience, my son was assigned to Khan Academy. And as I shared with you, he does have ADHD, and he hated Khan Academy to no end, would slam the computer and just get so frustrated. It just didn't work for him. So I reached out to his teacher and I said, what do you think about Dreambox? And she says, well, I love Dreambox, but you know, we use Khan because it's free. Well, I went on to Dreambox and I ended up getting a free 90-day trial, and that extended me all through, you know, the end of the distance learning quarter. And it was a wonderful tool for him because it had virtual manipulatives and things that he could do. It also started with a self-assessment. So it was the initial diagnostic. So I knew where he was academically, and I could assign him certain modules based on his ability. So there's so much customization that's available with these blended learning tools. I would just encourage you to find a tool that would work best for you, and, you know, go through the experience of being that learner, knowing your learners and what works for them, and to select a tool that you think would, you know, they would love and want to do. I know tons of kids love Prodigy because it is kind of situated in a Pokemon gaming style. And the kids will embrace it and adopt it. So, I mean, I think that's kind of, did I answer the question?
Yeah, no, I think that's fine. I was going to ask Dr. Harris, when you think about, like, for instance, your baseball, you know, classes versus the ones at Compass, what do you think the differences are between the learners and how they sort of react to the pedagogy online?
Well, for me, with my baseball players, I used Workplace Facebook, and okay, so the baseball players, of course, those are professional athletes. They're over 20. And then, you know, you got the kids under 18. So with the professional athletes, I created Workplace Facebook. We have, you know, and this is language development. So you have to read, you have to speak, you have to listen, you have to write and read. So all of the Workplace Facebook has like videos. I'll challenge them to, you know, talk about their game night. They have to respond to posts. They have to use vocabulary. And because Workplace Facebook is connected to Google Drive, I have already some Google Forms that are assessments for them that they have to respond to, and they have different reading prompts, writing prompts that they can pick up right there on Workplace Facebook. So like I said in the beginning, creating virtual spaces, I think, is a huge aspect for any type of learner. With my K-12 learners, we also use Workplace Facebook for the entire organization, and to connect with teachers and collaborate with teachers. But we also have those individual virtual spaces that we create with the families that work, like Dr. Dickenson said, that work best for those kids, because each individual home is different. Each player is different. I get some players that are, you know, no English at all, and I'm speaking Spanish all day and kind of supporting him back and forth, and we go through a back and forth. I think another challenge too to online education is a big, especially here in California, influx of ELL learners where all of the homes are mostly Spanish speaking parents. So having those bilingual resources available is really a key. That's why I use a lot of universal supports with creating my own lessons and activities, because I know that a lot of my parents don't speak English. So I think to be most effective, initially, we need to just make sure we're drawing from a repertoire of bilingual resources, diverse resources, period, whether it's an autistic kid, whether it's a kid with learning challenges, ADHD. I think we should make sure we have that foundation even from the start. Don't wait till you get to the classroom and show up and it's like, oh my God, this kid is this, and this kid has this challenge. And, you know, we all have different learning styles. So to be able to be universal, which is the kind of space I work from, that allows us to be more effective in our teaching and learning.
That's incredibly important, and I'm glad you brought that up. That's something that I want to discuss with you as well. Dr. Bhavsar, maybe you can talk to a little bit of what should we do, you know, both as instructors and instructional designers to try to overcome, you know, equity concerns with especially socioeconomics, where we're finding now that we've suddenly switched to, you know, everything being online, it has really highlighted the sort of bandwidth gap. And there's a lot of, you know, sort of privilege going on where things are being designed with an assumption that all learners will have high-speed internet and, you know, computer that they can use for networking. What are some ideas that we can do to try and work through that or work around that?
That is not an easy fix at all. So, so just control expectations in that area, I think, is one thing. Options. You have to have an option. So for example, what I'm doing in my class is I have a synchronous class, but everything will also be available asynchronously. So if a student can't do the little problem set that we do together in the synchronous class, we'll record that synchronous class so they can look at it later. I'll provide, and they can finish the work later at their own time as well. So I'm just trying to provide options for people, but not so many that I can't handle it, you know, as the instructor. I also think, and this is maybe an institutional thing, that institutions need to be very, very deliberate about where they put their resources and try as hard as we can to make it possible for our students to obtain resources.
Mike, that's great advice. Dr. Dickenson and Dr. Harris, do either of you have any thoughts on any approaches, especially toward SES and equity?
I would say for teachers, definitely start with building a professional learning community, a PLC. I would get involved with, you know, get on different social medias like Twitter. I'm on Twitter and you can follow me at Teacher Prep Tech. So there's your network right there. I see so much problem solving happening online on Twitter. It's amazing. And teachers are connecting with other teachers and providing insight and resources. I know AECT, American Education for College for Teachers, just came out with an article on Voices of the Coronavirus and talked about some of the experiences that teachers were facing in the areas of access and equity and what they did to provide supports. Again, a good friend of mine, Ben Cogswell, he works out here in Salinas. We have a lot of migrant workers in the Monterey County area. And he actually, I had him on my podcast and was talking about how he connected with the parents that were Spanish speaking only, and he used Facebook and had live chats with his parents, would write questions on Facebook and had it translated into Spanish using Google text to speech, and then all the comments that the parents gave were translated back in English because that was his preferred space. So definitely harnessing the power of social media. I mean, whether you're online or you're face-to-face, there are always going to be issues that coming up. When I started teaching in 1999, we had lockdowns like once a week. I had kids that weren't coming to, were coming to school and they hadn't eaten since the day before with lunch. So, part of being a teacher is you're also a counselor, you're a crisis worker, you're a mother, you're a therapist. I mean, there's so many hats that we wear, and we can't do it alone. So definitely building a network. I know personally, I've had a lot of success on Donors Choose and reaching out to friends of mine that don't even work in education and work in technology, and asking them to, help to donate, help me create pathways for these kids to have access to education. And, Ben told me he would send letters and actually go to the houses of his students and, bring them whatever tools they needed, and making sure that you're working with your school district. I know I've already gotten emails from my kids' school districts about having Chromebooks available and providing hotspots. And so there are teachers in school districts that are creating pathways for access and equity. There are many people that are doing amazing things. Another colleague of mine, Martin Cesarnos, who's in San Jose, he's the tech professor. He's amazing. When this whole crisis started, he was on the ground passing out computers, having the kids come and do pickups so that they could get technology tools, and giving them hotspots and whatever resources they need. So we need to just harness the power of, these networks that we're creating, and tap into, your universities and alumni, and create solutions.
No, it's terrific. Dr. Harris?
Yeah, I was going to piggyback on that, just creating universal or lessons and activities that are accessible. I've had a ton of students, especially in with Compass Charter schools. They don't have they may not have access to the internet. So, I'd have group collaboration, even on WhatsApp, using those. Even with my baseball players, they are now over in the Dominican, and they're still connecting with me on WhatsApp or the workplace Facebook. So, I think it's just really important to make sure those resources, and they're free resources, the resources that they can access from their smartphone, and it's a free app, or it's something that they can use and still access the content and still get their learning if they're even sitting at home working in a notebook, but they can see at least from their phone, even if they don't have internet and they can't access the internet, or they can't now go to the library that's closed. So I use voice threading. It's another platform that allows you to speak. It allows you to call in. It allows you to create a video all from your phone. Socrative.com is another resource that you can do asynchronous assessments where students can complete the assessment on their own time. So I like what Dr. Bhavsar said earlier about just having the asynchronous lessons that allow students to, continue and complete it, even if they don't finish it within the, deadline or the during the day when it's readily accessible. So I think that in itself will help in working from a universal standpoint. I can't stress that enough.
Yeah, and I think that flexibility is so important, that allowing people to choose can open it up, to new people that wouldn't necessarily be able to participate in the same, structure as everyone else. Well, we're running a little low on time. I want to get to a couple of the Q&A questions from our audience here. So one of the questions I see that has popped up here that I'll just open it up for anyone to answer here is, if this is the new normal, or even if it is just a temporary normal, what might the educational landscape look like 8 years from now in primary school, middle school, high school, and post-secondary? And how might school administrators best plan for it? So preparation for 8 years from now, what would that look like, and what should we be doing now to prepare for it?
You know what? I would have never thought there would be a day where people would be a professional YouTuber, but that is a reality. So I think we need to embrace the shift in our not just our schools, but what's happening in our society with economics and jobs and the future of education and the future of jobs. I would certainly, one of my favorite podcasts is The Side Hustle Show. His name's Pat Flynn. I love him. But I just learned so much about how people are reinventing themselves and creating jobs for themselves. And so really what I get from this particular podcast is that, you know, the future of jobs is mostly going to be entrepreneurial. People are going to be creating and inventing their own space. I think there's going to be a huge space for social emotional learning, because I also think that a lot of the jobs are going to be replaced by robots. So I think someone had talked about augmented reality and VR. That's definitely going to have a huge space. One of my favorite TED Talks is Changing Educational Paradigms by I can't remember his name, but if you type that in, that's been my vision for education, is just changing those educational paradigms and having students create those personalized learning, what their goals are, what they want to achieve. So I think we're going to see a lot of shift in terms of personalized learning. I know at National University, we're actually moving all of our classes towards precision learning, which will give us just-in-time feedback on how our teacher candidates and students are meeting course learning outcomes that are considered micro competencies. So the way I explain it to my teachers is you take a Common Core standard and you break it up and you see all the specific skills that are in that standard and those skills and the knowledge that you want them to explicitly teach. So we're going to create better ways and pathways to see what are the skills that our students need. Because if you walk into any middle school classroom and you try to teach them about something like the quadratic formula, they might say, why do I need to learn this? I could just Google it, you know, or I'll just use photo math and get the answer instantly. So education has been long overdue for a huge shift. And I think the current situation is just pushing it in that direction.
I think that's exactly right. And I've seen the same thing working with students in journalism and things at the undergrad level, that they're facing a world very much what I think you're right, that education is headed that same way, where we're going from a model of very structured institutions to a distributed model where everyone, can teach, on their own and form their own, smaller groups and non-traditional settings. Well, another question from our audience, how do you encourage college or adult beginning level ESL students to access and maintain learning engagement when their English proficiency and computer knowledge might be very limited? Anyone have any thoughts there? Dr. Bhavsar?
Yeah, can I address, I want to address that one, and then also there's a second question which I feel goes along with that, which is
Sure.
Someone is saying, how do we create a caring classroom online when all of our students are new to us? We didn't even meet them, and so I think those two things actually go together. So for the ESL students, there's a lot of books about adult motivation or adult motivation and learning. There's a lot of scholarship in that area, so I'd encourage you to check that out. It's deep scholarship, so it's not easy reading, but it's there. And then for a faculty member, I think we have different levels of things that we want to do. There's the must do. We must do this in order to say that our students have achieved what they need to achieve. There's stuff that we could do, and there's stuff that we should do, and there's stuff that we could do. And faculty love to live in this could do area, oh, it's so cool to live in could do. Draw it back to the must do and help our students focus on the must do as well, so that they have the extra energy and cushion to overcome other issues that they may have, such as struggles with ESL or computers or whatever. There will be time for creativity. I don't mean to say that we can't be creative, but there's going to be time for the rest of it. But the reason these two go together is because kindness, explicit kindness and caring, I think, is really important. You have to actually tell people that you care about them and you're interested and you're paying attention to what they do. And I think that may be also true for students. I'm not a K through 12 teacher, so I can't speak to that. I do know that the emotional effort that is going to be required of us this fall semester is going to be far beyond anything that we've ever experienced. And so watch that and, fill your own gas tank, so that you've got the emotional energy to do what you need to do in the classroom.
That is very important advice. I think that, it's critically important, as you say, as we go into this fall, which will probably be unlike anything that we've ever done before in terms of the pressures from all sides. Well, we're almost out of time, so I wanted to open it up. Let's go around one more time, and if you have any final thoughts, something, an area that we haven't talked about that you want to, really, put a word in for, or a final thought on what we should do to prepare for this coming fall. Dr. Harris, let's start with you, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I just think that as we wrap up, just to, set all biases and judgments. We're in a time period right now where it's not only a COVID pandemic, but it's also, the Black Lives Matter movement with, mainly focusing our energies to be more human and not allowing the computer to take away, that humanity aspect. I think, yes, the Black Lives Movement is very important to me, but I think also we're losing in society like a connection of humanity. We're not connecting that. And so I would say from that aspect to just make sure you have a more open-minded, diverse, universal growth mindset, because to embrace diversity and our differences is only going to make us stronger. It's only going to make us better. It's only going to make us more universal in how we outreach and how we connect, how we teach, how we learn. And so I think that is very, very important. And I hope, the best for all of us, especially in education, which is, it should be a diverse leadership and a diverse, because that's the population we serve. It's diverse.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Dr. Dickenson?
All right, I'm just looking at my notes here to see what I didn't hit on. Yikes. I mean, I know it can feel super overwhelming, and we are teachers. We love to work collaboratively, and part of what makes being in a K-12 space so engaging and so powerful is having other teachers have our back. So I would just encourage you guys, if you are in the K-12 space, to, get your squad together. Think about how you can work smarter and not harder. So if you're in the K-5 space, you can maybe have one person from each of your grade level team focus on one content area and have them be the expert in that space and work collaboratively to create material and resources and design that online learning space. For middle school and high school, I would strongly encourage you as well to focus on designing instruction that's interdisciplinary. Think about how you can build in project-based learning into your instruction. I was just actually grading one of my students' papers before the meeting, and she had this whole project on having the kids write their story based on songs that they love. So I encourage you to connect to your students by thinking about their interest in how you can design instruction that will get them to be engaged and be part of the learning process. I mean, you could do scavenger hunts with your kiddos and have them find geometric shapes around their house or objects that start with whatever letter you're focusing on, and make sure that you're creating experiences that ground the real world with the digital. And just, continue to grow. We host monthly webinars at National University. This week, actually on Monday, we're doing one on Flipgrid, if you haven't heard of Flipgrid. So Continue to push your digital expertise and learn from your peers, get on Twitter and build a professional learning network. And have fun.
An important reminder for sure. Dr. Bhavsar?
So this may sound a little facetious, but I'm actually really serious. Drink enough water because you need your energy. You need your physical and mental energy. So water, nutrition, sleep, exercise, those things are actually essential. And then also, I think it may be wise to monitor our use of social media so that it is productive and helpful and engaging and not toxic. So that's my parting advice.
Well, that's terrific. And on that note, I want to thank all three of you for participating today and for sharing your time and expertise and so many good resources. I'm hopeful we can sort of compile some of those for attendees afterwards. And I want to thank everyone attending for joining us today. And thank you for being a part of Leadership Month here at Rossier.
Well, thank you, Dr. Smith. This session concludes Rossier's Leadership Month. I would like to take the opportunity to thank our panelists and moderator for providing valuable insights into their career journey. I also want to extend my gratitude to Matt DeGrush, Director of Alumni Engagement, for spearheading the Rossier Month initiative to continue the annual leadership conference tradition into the virtual world. Thank you for continuing to lead the Rossier and continue to lead the Rossier world and put the equity and access for all at the heart of your practice. As I mentioned earlier, a recording of today's webinar will be sent out in the next few days. When you close out of today's webinar, a short survey will appear. Please take a moment to provide feedback on today's webinar and share your ideas for future virtual programs. Don't forget to tag us on social media using the hashtag #RossierLeads. Thank you for attending. We appreciate your participation, insight, and present. Have a great day and fight on.